and welcome to PM Express here on Joy News on Multi TV. Tonight, the IEA, that's the Institute of Economic Affairs, is on a mission, and the mission is simple but rather complex. And I guess I'm saying this because there are a lot of questions that arise as far as this mission is concerned. Wondering what the mission is? They're on a mission to, as well, see to it that the winner-takes-all policy in our party or in our country's politics is scrapped off. How possible is this? Will this be a mission impossible? Will this be a mission that is really possible in a country that is so polarized, in a country that have become virtually used to the winner-takes-all policy? Tonight we'll find out how possible this is. My name is Prince Minka, and do join us with your messages on our various social networking platforms, and certainly we'll share them with the rest of the world. Welcome to the program. All right, so tonight my guest, Dr. William Ahaji, you all know him, former CEO of the National Identification Authority. He's a governance advisor as well. Welcome to the program, Doc.
Thank you.
And also
a member of the IEA WTA Advisory Committee.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. And also Dr. Rose Mensah-Kuttin, she's the director Abantu, and welcome to the program, Doc.
Thank you. Also a member of the committee.
Absolutely. And you're also part of the program. Let's keep hearing your views as well as we discuss this all-important subject matter. And you know, starting from the Fourth Republic, the winner-takes-all policy has been with us. And recently, the IEA was on this mission, or as I put it, to, as it were, gather information and thoughts from key political figures in the country. And of course, there was a committee that was set up to do this. But I'm not going to say all this, but I would have Doc and Madam here break it down for us, and then we'll find out exactly what is in this particular mission of the IEA and how possible is it for the country Ghana to win itself off the winner-take-all policy. Now, I guess you're wondering what the winner-take-all policy really is. So I'll start with you, Dr. Haji. Really, what is it all about? Winner-takes-all.
Thank you very much. It's an electoral formula that relates largely with the executive and not Parliament per se. The executive in the sense that the results of the election allows the first to pass the post, as they say. In other words, it's called the first past the post. The first to secure 50+1 votes in the presidential election becomes the one who assumes the mandate to form a government. Therefore, you are looking at a situation where the Constitution confers the authority on the person who secures the 50+1 votes to become the main leader of government business.
And this has been with us since the inception of the Fourth Republic, Doc, and how has it helped us as a country?
I think that in 1992, as you rightly said, we had the Constitution, and then we started the Fourth Republic. And at the time, it was very important to have that kind of system, in the sense that we were moving away from a military regime over a long period of time, and therefore we needed a system that will hold the nation together. So it was felt that the executive type of governance system, whereby a lot of power resided with the presidency, would be the option for us. Over time, however, we have seen that it has tended to lead to a situation where we are referring to as the winner-takes-all system, where the presidency and the party from which the presidential candidate wins power tends to be the one which forms the government, and therefore tends to bring on board solely, almost solely, members of that particular political party, excluding all kinds of institutions and individuals who could play an equally meaningful role in the governance system of the country. And we believe that as a growing country, right now we have a population of almost 25 million, and therefore you will begin to realize that many more people are enabled, or many more people have developed their capacities. A lot of people are going to school and all of that. So we want to believe that it will serve us better if the system open itself up to allow many more individuals and groups to participate.
And that's my cue to bring in this question. How is that possible? Like you heard in my intro, I mentioned that we're in a country where partisanship and polarization actually become a normal, something that we do every day, and it's become part of our body politic. And how easy would it be scrapping the winner-takes-all policy?
Well, basically, you've made the point that this system of governance is virtually promoting polarization, is holding back the development effort, and is threatening the stability of the state. As my colleague said, we have practiced it for over 2 decades, and constitutions are living documents. The constitutional reforms are informed by the experiences and the value systems of a people. So clearly, it has become quite evident that our elections are becoming high-stake events. It's getting more frightening for people. In the run-up to elections, people tend to start wanting to leave the country. Some actually do. All sorts of things happen. So it is becoming quite obvious that we need to review this particular system of electing the leaders of the country. Now, what we mean by winner takes all stretches from appointments, you know, to of different officers, to issues about even decisions about how the development process should go. Now, and it becomes an exclusive mandate of the government in power. And as was mentioned, it also leads to an effort on the part of, if you like, the loser to ensure that an incumbent government is not successful in the discharge of his mandate, so that they will have the option of assuming power. Now, that compromises the development of the state itself. Maybe the party that's in power will fail or may fail, and then you assume leadership. But what if we say they failed or they have not been very successful? It means that they haven't delivered on the public services that they ought to have delivered on. And then you are going to inherit that situation. It makes governance difficult for you as well.
And that's why the actual norm or the procedure, as we're used to, is that if you're in a position and you should make any suggestion, anyone in government would think it's a trap, and we don't want to take that suggestion. Is that not what has culminated into all this?
That's a manifestation of the winner takes all. There's mutual distrust. I suggest that this is the best way to go. And then you say, well, wait till you assume power, then you can do it the way you want to do. Or that I call an economic forum and I say, okay, why not join us to think through how to solve the challenges that we face? He said, no, I'm not going to come. Why should I give you my idea so that, you know, I don't get the chance to...
But there are examples of political parties, and Doc, I'll bring you in here at this moment. There are examples of political parties in this country that have made suggestions as to what the country can do to win itself off certain developmental shortfalls. A clear example is the 3 billion Chinese loan. And if you do recall, the minority held a press conference and was asking government not to go on ahead with it. But you heard the criticisms and the back and forth that came as a result. So again, I'll go back to that question, that yes, we do have the winner-take-all policy in place. We do have that system in place. But we also have a situation where you can have those in opposition give advice, but it's been buffed away or thrown away.
I think it's all about moving away from the real mandate of statecraft, so to speak, because it's no more a contestation of ideas, but it's about personalities, and it's about where you are perceived to belong to. It's not about what you can contribute. It's not about your merit or your capacity. It's about where you belong. And therefore, if you belong to Party A and Party A is in power, then it's like you are coming from the king's palace, something like that, or you are the offspring of the chief, so to speak, because we also believe in the chieftaincy system. So if I can just use that as an analogy. So if you are not part of the party in power, then whoever you are and whatever you can contribute and wherever you are and you are whatever you are able to do, it does not really matter, because then you belong to an underclass, so to speak. So I think this is a system that is not serving us well. And that is why, through the constitutional review process, citizens actually recommended that we need to open up our governance system a bit more, so that we close up these kinds of differences, which doesn't help us, because that kind of polarization means that so many individuals and groups who could contribute to the governance system of the country are excluded. As you rightly said, some a grouping gave some ideas, but it was ignored because you are not the one in power. The system allows me, who is in power, to make all the decisions, and it is mandated by the Constitution also. The government has the power to appoint so many positions, including independent institutions, institutions such as STRAD, the EC, and all of those institutions. But then, how do we make sure that we have a strong president, we have a strong leadership, but at the same time, there are separation of powers, so that other constituted bodies or maybe some independent bodies could also make some appointment with oversight responsibility for certain groups of individuals.
I'm making this point because I'm looking at how easy this advocacy is going to be for the IEA going forward. I'm just wondering, don't you think we've become so used to this winner-takes-all policy?
Well, we have
hence
been,
this will become a major impediment?
We have been to all parts of the country. We have held consultations in Kumasi, we have held one in Takoradi, we have held one in Tamale, in Accra, and also in the in Ho, and so on. And the consensus that is coming up is that people are not comfortable, people are not happy. Citizens feel excluded. They feel that we deserve better as a society than what we are getting. That it seems as if the country belongs to a group of people who come into power. And therefore, we need a much more robust system that will allow many more groupings, so to speak, to participate.
And listening to you, you made mention of the fact that some consultations were made, and I see names like Dr. SKB Asante and of course Dr. Abu Sakara Foster, the flag bearer of the CPP in the 2012 elections, and of course former President John Agyekum Kufuor. And I'm curious, did the former president realize that it is essential to scrap the winner-takes-all policy when he got out of the whole governance system? Doc, don't answer that yet. Let's take a break first.
Okay.
Welcome back. This is still PM Express here on Joy News on Multi TV. Still waiting for your comments, and we will share them with the rest of the world. Now, before the break, I was just wondering why former President Kufuor will be advocating for this scrapping of the winner-takes-all policy now that he's out of government, now that he's no longer president. And Doc, I'll let you have a bite on that.
I think that reflection is good, and anybody who does not believe in change, it's really not a serious person. And so perhaps maybe having been out of office, he's had a lot more time to reflect, and also based on his own experiences as a president. So former President Kufuor thinks that there is a need for a strong presidency.
So he agrees that he was too powerful as a president?
Well, he did not say that.
But that's one of the key areas you're looking at, the fact that the presidency is too powerful.
When he says a strong presidency, he's saying that in terms of leadership quality, that the president must be imbued with a sense of mission, a sense of commitment, and a sense of urgency. But then he also advocated for the prime ministerial position rather than the vice presidential position, which is not very clear in terms of the roles and responsibilities. He was also in favor of a second chamber where many more professional individuals and groups could be represented. You know, for decades, we have had a problem with women's representation. And so that second chamber could offer a space for many more professionals, including women professionals to be part of the governance system, because it seems also that the Council of State is not as strong, or perhaps not playing as transparent a role as we might want to see. But then if you have a second chamber, then you would be able to place all of these very competent individuals and representatives to also contribute to the governance system in the country.
Brilliant ideas, but Dr. Haji, how would that play out in as much as we want to advance our democracy and development?
Well, in a bicameral system of government, the upper chamber does more than just advice. Sometimes it does the actual approvals that are required for bills and appointments, you know. And if you remember what we said, there are recommendations to the effect that some of the persons that the president appoints could be appointed by Parliament, 2/3 of Parliament. And therefore, if you have another chamber that would support that process, it depoliticizes the whole issue of who becomes the head of particular institution, especially the independent governance institutions, and of course the Electoral Commission. It also builds trust in the particular institutions. It is terrible if people lose confidence in state institutions that are supposed to secure their rights. The judiciary, the police, the Electoral Commission, IOCO, you know, SHRAJ, etc. If people lose interest in those institutions, where else can they go? So you want to have a situation where there will be strong confidence and the integrity and independence of these institutions can be maintained. And I think his recommendation is that it should not just play an advisory role to the president, but it should assume a more effective role as part of the legislature in passing laws and also in appointing people in whom everybody will have some trust.
Okay. Now, Dr. Rosemens, I know you would have to leave us, but before you do, let's talk about what you raised earlier on at your conference when you met the press. Now, you mentioned the need to have the state fund political parties. How is that going to work? And also strengthening decentralization. How is that going to play out as well?
Well, I think you are aware that these are recommendations that have come from the consultations, and the committee presented these recommendations and also its own assessment of the recommendations and so on. With the political party funding, the assumption behind that is that we need to build transparency into the system. So maybe at a certain point, if we are able to put in place a mechanism that provides some fund where political parties of all kinds can draw from, then at least there's a minimum threshold with which every political party begins with. And then there should also be a ceiling in terms of how much every political party should utilize for their campaigns. In actual fact, the IEA itself has done some work in this area. And there's a political party funding bill in place, and the modalities for making sure that political parties hold themselves accountable to whatever funding they access has been well.
But aren't we going to have challenges? I mean, I know there are a lot of political pundits out there who would argue that we have challenges with assessing even district assemblies common fund.
Yes.
How much more a bill that will initiate a process where political parties can assess funding from government?
Yes, I think that we need to agree that this is our country and that we want the country to work. And if we want the country to work, then some of these ideas can be tested. And then if we support it with the kind of support we have seen from the consultations that we have had across the country, where everybody is saying that we are becoming too much polarized, we need to do away with this kind of polarization. Let's work much more inclusively so that we can hold this country together. I think it is the thinking that goes with the policies and the provisions that we are talking about, because by themselves they may not work.
But sustainability is key here. I mean, to ensure that there's always funds available.
I think
for
it's
the
possible.
political parties.
When we decided that we wanted a national health insurance scheme in place, of course we know it's facing a lot of challenges now, but we were able to decide on where to find the money from, and we put a percentage to it. So me and you, when we go shopping, we know that there's a percentage that is taken from our money to feed into the National Health Insurance policy. But the point is that we as citizens must take an interest. We must monitor. We must make sure that we hold the people that we give positions to in trust for our welfare. We should hold them accountable. But if we sit quiet and we don't complain, we don't ask questions, we don't make sure that the right thing is done, that is when we get to the situation where we are. So I believe that it is possible. Whatever policy we agree on as citizens of this country, we must push it to its limit. Because in the political party funding bill, there are mechanisms in place. For example, if you're a political party and you filled in many more women, you are able to access much more funding from whatever funding mechanism will be put in place. So ideas are important and policies are important. It's how we roll it out to make sure that it fits the purpose for which it is put in place. And I think we should be able to do that.
Very well. I would have wished to go more into details with you on this. But Dr. Rosemary Zakutien, thank you very much for being a part of PM. When we come back from the break, we'll also hear from Dr. Haji, and we'll try and draw a linkage, looking at the scrapping of the, what do you call it, winner-takes-all system, the scrapping of the winner-takes-all system, and how we can reconcile that with our national development plans. Stay with us. This is still PM Express. Welcome back to PM Express here on Joy News on Multi TV, and we've just been joined by Dr. Ransford Jampo, a senior research fellow with the Institute of Economic Affairs. Doc, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll go back to where we left off before going on a break. And Dr. Haji, I quickly would want to have you speak to the issue of funding, for political parties. And per what you proposed, the IEA, we're looking at the states initiating that process.
Yes, I think that if we want to reap the dividends of democracy, we have to invest in growing democracy. Now, there's the alternative for not financing or funding political parties is a situation where the political parties find their own resources. And how they do that, we don't know. It leads to the creation of slush funds. It leads to the misappropriation of public resources. So ultimately becomes even more expensive not to fund political parties than to find the money, secure the money for them. As the previous speaker said, there are ways of raising money to fund political parties, and the details can be worked out. But the principle that we should provide some support for political parties, not every political party, but also ensure that they don't spend beyond certain limits, is appropriate. And if they do spend that and we get to know they are in breach, the appropriate sanctions must apply. Political parties are organizations.
If you don't get to know...
If you don't get to know, then they get away with it. But then...
so that means there's still a challenge.
In providing the funding, you're also assisting them to perform functions other than fighting elections only. Political parties are to grow leaders, and between elections they do virtually nothing. Now that's the time to spend in educating people, train people in all issues around policy making, statecrafts. I mean, all these other things are supposed to be continuous activities between elections. It doesn't happen. Those things don't happen because the political parties look for money, contest elections, and then they go to sleep and hope that the next time around they will do that again. If they're lucky and they win, obviously they will have to recoup the investment in winning the election. We don't want the political parties to remain electoral machines only. They should be leadership training institutions as well, because they are governments in waiting anytime they are out of power. And so they need to be practicing how to run government. That's why we used to have shadow cabinets, shadow ministers. You create that opportunity for them to grow leaders, to grow people who would maintain the states.
Okay, before I bring Dr. Ransford Jampo in, let's go back to that fear I was expressing, about the state funding political parties, and you mentioned that there could be a breach, and if you're caught, then of course the law can deal with you. But what specific mechanism can be put in place to, as it were, prevent that?
To prevent
the breaches?
The breaches. Well, you define the conditions under which you finance your political activities. You give clear guidelines as to how they can do that, so that, and then you put down appropriate sanctions, because, you know, laws are made to guide our behavior. Laws are made to correct, you know, improper behavior as well. You know, but you're dealing with human institutions. There are always opportunities for people to do things that they shouldn't do. And so while we are prescribing ways of dealing with the situation, we also want to anticipate that in the unlikely event that they do otherwise, there will be sanctions to either punish them. I mean, there will be rules to punish them or to deter people from continuing.
And so you agree that it's not 100% foolproof?
No, definitely it can't be 100% foolproof, because you're dealing with human institutions.
All right, Doug, let me bring you on this one. I mean, the state funding political parties, how crucial is that to national development?
Well, I think generally, if you speak to the political parties across the political divide, there is some consensus that there should be some form of public funding for political parties as a way of creating or ensuring a level playing field for all of them. This whole idea was mooted by the Ghana Political Parties program way back in 2006, and I know the idea was discussed with then President J. Kufuor, and he openly accepted it. A bill was drafted. It was the approach to drafting the bill was quite bipartisan, because you have representatives from across the political divide participating in the process, and the bill was submitted to President Atta Mills somewhere in 2010, and around that time we're told he pushed it to then Vice President, who is now the President, John Mahama, to study it and to see whether it could be implemented. The idea is weak political parties churn out weak leaders. Now, weak leaders would always be unable to put in place proactive and practical policy prescriptions that would sort of help us fight poverty and underdevelopment. And so if we are looking for good leaders, then let's first tackle the political parties, because the political parties are supposed to be the vehicles through which political leaders will be very much groomed and trained to be able to take up political office. Oftentimes, as Doc Mahaji said, they go to sleep. And in political science, we have a term we call departicipation. Okay, everybody goes to sleep. All political parties go to sleep during inter-election period. They only surface during election. Most of the times it's because they are not funded. In between election period, they will have to be able to explain or point out the loopholes in government policies and draw attention to Ghanaians regarding their alternatives that they may intend implementing. And all these require money. There is no level playing field, and we are always talking about abuse of incumbency and all that. And we are saying public funding is also in itself a form of a solution to winner-takes-all practice of government. Because
but wouldn't the incumbent always be at the advantage edge? Because, I mean, you have
no,
the party
if there is
controlling.
If there is a level, see what happens in other countries. If there is a level playing field, and there are rules, there is a law that requires some funding to be advanced to political parties, then incumbent gets access to that fund. Those who are in opposition are also given that fund.
Right. So who controls the fund?
Well, in the draft bill that we initiated, we also discussed with the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission agreed to be the custodian of the bill and the one who would ensure that it is properly implemented. We know that it's been argued that conditions are not ripe, times are hard, and that so it's the idea to have public funding for political parties may not be feasible. Yes, but we're hoping that things may improve. And as we move on as a nation, if you are interested in building strong political parties, if if you are interested in moving beyond the virtually two-party state we are almost creating, then there should be some funding for political parties. Because it is only when they are funded, if it is only when the other party knows that even if it doesn't win election, it will be able to survive. That election will not be a do or die affair. If I go source my own funding, if I go to look for my money through all dubious means, and I'm able to win an election,
or fair means.
Dubious or fair means, and I'm able to win an election,
right.
The requirement will be that once in power, I'll have to be able to satisfy those who gave me the money. Okay, and so all others who didn't contribute are not part of the governance process. You give contracts to only those who funded you, and that promotes winner
I'm
takes all.
staying longer on this because I'm curious to know how it's going to be sustained. Just as I asked Doc moments ago, how are you going to sustain this? Again, I go back to the question of who should control the funding. Should it be a neutral body? You know, decoupled of government.
I responded to it, apart from some of the challenges that we've been able to identify with our electoral commission. I believe largely we know that it's an independent organization. And I said in drafting the bill, we worked in consultation with the EC, and the EC agreed to be the custodian of the bill and to ensure that it is implemented. Talking about sustainability, there are sources of funds earmarked for the bill. It may, I mean, I don't remember exactly where the sources will be coming from, but it may include some monies from the consolidated fund, some percentage of taxes, being paid into it. I think 1% of monies that are accrued in the consolidated fund or something. I mean, if I give you to get a copy, you'll be able to know the sources of fund. But the point is that with those sources being paid into the political party fund, it will be very much sustainable, and it will ensure that whoever wins wouldn't take it all. It will also prevent situations where certain notorious people hijack political party activities and dictate their internal democratic practices. I mean, he contributed to funding the party, and so his wishes should be done. And so, but political parties are supposed to be internally democratic before, when they are given the mantle of leadership, they also ensure that we are also democratic. So democracy should also be practiced within a political party. But if we don't ensure a kind of public funding for them, and one person is able to pay it all, then he calls the shots.
Okay, looking at the proposals from the IEA as far as the winner-takes-all policy is concerned, one crucial area is the responsibility of the legislature. Now, I was just wondering how that could be reconciled with a national development plan.
Okay, yeah, as I said, I'll take them separately. Now, the issue about the legislature is the concern expressed by people to the extent that it is not really performing its oversight responsibility over the executive and indeed other arms of government, but largely over the executive, because of the nature of the relationship between the executive and the legislature. Members of the legislature are members of the executive. Now, that makes oversight a little difficult. Secondly, we're saying that even if the president is desirous of picking his ministers from the legislature, from parliament, as required by law, the reform we are calling for is to the extent that then the minister abdicates that membership of the House, and then he assumes a full responsibility as a minister, and then Parliament stands aside as an entity by itself that will perform all the constitutional roles that it's supposed to perform. If it doesn't do that, then we will have the situation that we have, that everybody is saying that Parliament is not exercising its oversight responsibility of Parliament, and Justice Schott also said it. We read it in the news that the Speaker of Parliament had cause to complain that ministers were not attending parliamentary sessions. You know what the ministry does. I mean, the minister is virtually overwhelmed with a lot of issues, and so how is he combining that with attending to parliamentary duties, participating in parliamentary debate when his office is waiting? So you find they come in the morning briefly, or they come when parliament is closing. They are not focused on one of them. They're doing both. They're trying. Many of them are trying, but they are just not delivering
but if
as
we are
efficiently as they should on both ends.
But if we are to take the new face of the legislature as proposed by the IEA again, that where we would have an upper chamber for that matter, which would have members from the Council of State, how's that going to play out?
No, we don't even know which one will be accepted. You know, so we are not combining the two. The conversion of Council of State into the upper chamber is a totally separate issue. But the issue about, you know, asking members of parliament to remain members of parliament is very crucial in this whole exercise of separation of powers and promoting checks and balances in the administration of the country. So,
and if that should happen, how would they push for a national development?
Yeah, in fact, if you look at the directive principles of state policy, it imbues the state with that responsibility to ensure that change is guided over time. Now, every government that would hold the responsibility to run the state machinery is virtually enjoined by those principles to do this responsibility of guided change. Now, what it means is that as a country, we should be looking a little more into the future in setting an agenda for development. The way we are going about it, it's not brought us anywhere. There's too short-term prescriptions, largely, and therefore we are not clear where we are going as a country.
Very well.
Manifestos are fine, but they should draw from a bigger picture.
Okay, after the break, I'll hear from Dr. Ransford Jampo as to exactly what bigger picture we can draw as far as national development plans are concerned. This is still PM Express here on Joy News. Stay with us. Welcome back. This is still PM Express here on Joy News. Now, we just quickly would want to trace the genesis of this proposal that we have two chambers in our legislature. Is it really a new phase, or is something that we've known already in the past? I'm saying that is this really new, having separate chambers in the House?
No. I think way back in 1960, we practiced what we call the presidential system of government, where the executive was separated from the legislature, and we saw what happened. In 1969, we had the parliamentary or cabinet, or also bicephalous system of government, where the executive was part of the legislature. That was when K. Buzia was the prime minister and Nduda Akufo-Addo was the head of state. In 1979, we went back to the Fourth Republic, presidential system of government. Unfortunately, it was not allowed to work to its perfection because of the 1981 coup. I think the framers of the 1992 constitution that decided to borrow from the features of both the presidential system and the parliamentary system and fused it into what we have now, which other people prefer to call the hybrid system. And in our view, it is doing more harm to our democracy than good, because in our democracy there is what we call the need for a countervailing authority. Power must counter power. You understand? In Montesquieu's exposition on separation of powers and checks and balances, he argued that for us to be able to have constitutionalism, not the fact that we have a constitution, but for us to be able to ensure that we fetter and we restrain the exercise of power, you need separate bodies to be able to ensure that power counters power. One key of such bodies is the legislature. And unfortunately, if you come to our part of the world, the legislature is not able to play any role as a countervailing authority to the powers of the executive, because if you've not been appointed as a minister, you are always looking up to the executive to be appointed a minister.
But this is not the first time this particular issue has come up. I mean, the issue that there's a need for us to separate as in a member of parliament not necessarily being a minister. The need for us to do that separation. This is not the first time it has come up. Why
No, I don't
Why
remember.
has it been difficult?
I don't remember the first time it came up, but I know that it is part of our proposal.
Yes.
For dealing with winner takes all.
Analysts like yourself have maintained
yes,
this
yes. But the
position.
point is that it will.
Why
it will require some amendment in our constitution, our fundamental laws, of the land. And thankfully, even though stalled, I think the constitutional process, review process, will still go on. And so we are looking forward to feeding into the process with some of these practical proposals. Yes, constitution review is done in a lifetime, okay? So there can be no meaningful review of our 1992 constitution without tackling some of these pertinent issues that aid the maturation of our democratization process. And so it's important that we look at all these. And
but for now, how is it affecting us?
Well, now it's affecting us because, like I said, you don't have, you don't have the executive being held in check. You don't, I mean, everything that emanates from the executive goes to Parliament, and it is okayed. Because, I mean, how do you expect me, an MP, who is also a member of the executive, to go to the floor of Parliament to critique a decision that I've taken at the cabinet level? In America, you would have Democrats and Republicans say, Mr. President, this we know is coming from you, but we are sorry, we can't okay it. And so the political heads, they know how to play what we call politics of persuasion. You know how to convince Republicans to come on board to support a motion before the House. But here, the maxim is that the opposition, the minority would always have their say, the majority will have its way, and it fuels winner takes all practice of government. We have won, we are controlling the executive level, at the cabinet, at the parliamentary level too. We control because we have a commanding majority, and our people would always look up to us for ministerial appointment, and because of that, they would always support us. And so see, PC Apiofori was never appointed a minister. Why? Because he stood independent in Parliament, sometimes criticizing his own government. You understand?
He was chairman of the public, what do you call it?
No, I said he never benefited from a ministerial appointment, even though, in my view, he would have been
but he was holding a critical position that checked government. I understand you when you say he was never appointed, but he held a position as chairman of the Government Assurance Committee that obviously checked the executive.
What I'm saying is that he never benefited from any ministerial appointment, even though compared to some of the ministers that were appointed in the administration of J. Kufuor, he would have been a better, minister. But those who critique government in power and were later appointed as ministers, all of a sudden were silenced. And you know the examples. You can talk about Abang Bagbin, you can talk about Yiti Mensah, you can talk about John Tia. I mean, these were the loudest critic, Afute Agbo and all that. They were the loudest critics of the Atta Mills regime. But the moment they were giving ministerial appointment, they kept quiet. I mean, it's human. How do you expect them to come to the floor of Parliament to critique decisions that they themselves also took, behind or at the executive level? And so the point is that it doesn't strengthen Parliament, it doesn't promote checks and balances, and it fuels the practice of winner takes all politics. And we think that to be able to move forward as a nation, it is very important that we look at an arrangement that would ensure that we strictly separate the executive arm of government from the legislature. Note that in the CRC report, they recommended that the practice of compelling the president to appoint majority of its ministers from Parliament should be abolished. Meaning the president may appoint from Parliament, but not majority. But I'm saying that in itself is also weak. Because you can have a daring president who will go out of way to appoint all his ministers from Parliament to further cripple the legislative arm of government.
Let's look at one aspect of Parliament, which is also crucial. And I mentioned it when you mentioned of PC Apiofori, Government Assurance Committee and Parliament. They are supposed to check on the promises that the executive arm makes and ensure that things are put right. You smile. Is it a weaker institution?
Well, I don't know, but what have they done so far? I mean, from 1992, what has that committee
So
done to ensure?
How can it be strengthened?
Well, I mean, it can be strengthened when Parliament is made independent. Okay, that you have
So for now,
an
Parliament's not
independent.
independent.
Listen, that you have an independent Parliament prepared to keep the executive on its toes, would even make irrelevant that assurance committee, because the executive, the ministers, can be held before Parliament and they will be scrutinized thoroughly without partisan consideration. Okay, we think that an independent Parliament, does it all. Do you know? We either separate them or we practice fully the parliamentary system of government, where then all members of the executive are also members of the legislature, and the prime minister is just seen as the primus inter pares, under the doctrine of collective responsibility that operates in the parliamentary system of government. One goof of a minister will bring the whole government down. Have you heard of this expression? The British Parliament can do all things on earth except to turn a man into a woman, and vice versa. You say this to talk about the strength of the legislative arm of government, because after all, it is the only chamber that serves as a body that represents all the Ghanaian populace. As for the presidency, as for the executive, it's a section of Ghanaians who voted for it. Okay, but all Ghanaians are represented in Parliament.
Okay.
And so ideally, Parliament is supposed to be a sovereign body, a sovereign countervailing authority to the powers of the executive.
Okay, now what are the signs written on the wall that's supposed to indicate to all of us that it is indeed possible to scrap off the winner takes all policy?
Well,
in our
the prospects are bright, because we know somewhere in 2013, 1st July, when the President, His Excellency John Mahama, met some eminent citizens of statesmen and women during the Republic Day celebration, he made it clear that he is not in favor and in support of the winner-takes-all practice of governance.
So that declaration.
Subsequently, you've had other eminent people who have openly indicated their dislike for the current system or for the status quo. And so we're hoping that the number one citizen has said he doesn't like it. We are going to send our report to him, and we're hoping that he would back his words with action. And I'm sure
so for how long do you envisage it will be implemented?
Well, we are going through a constitution review process,
right.
So we expect it to be factored. The fight against winner-takes-all practice of governance will be factored in the whole constitutional review exercise. And I think Ghana will be a better place for all of us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ransford Jampo. And Dr. Ransford Jampo is a senior research fellow with the Institute of Economic Affairs. And earlier we were in the, here actually with Dr. William Mahaji, former CEO of the National Identification Authority and also a government advisor. We're also here with Dr. Rose Mensah-Kutin. She is the director of Abantu. That'll be it for PM Express. And thanks again, Dr. Jampo. Good night.